Greetings and welcome to the webinar today. The topic is Unified Messaging 101, a prelude to TechEd. Before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So, as mentioned, my name is J. Peter Bruzzese. I'm a Microsoft Exchange MVP. There are about 100 of us in the world, 20 of us in the United States, and basically this is an award that's given to folks that participate in the Exchange community. In addition, I'm also a Microsoft Certified Trainer. As you can see, I like taking certification exams. I have a lot of different exams under my belt. And I'm a technical author with over a dozen books that have been sold internationally to my credit. I'm a tech speaker for Tech Mentor, Connections, MEC, and TechEd. And actually, that's the basis for this session because next month, the beginning of June, I'm going to be speaking at TechEd. I'm a technical reviewer for msexchange.org. I'm an article consultant for Redmond Magazine. I'm a journalist for InfoWorld. I write the Enterprise Windows column, and I'm the Exchange 2010 and 2013 instructor for TrainSignal. In my spare time, well, let's be honest, with all that, who has spare time? So that's pretty much me in a nutshell. Now, the question is, why is this a prelude session? As you can see here, next month I'm going to be speaking at TechEd in New Orleans. I'll be presenting this session, The Deep Dark Secrets of Unified Messaging. So for those of you who are going to be there, the session is on Wednesday from 1:30 to 2:45 on June 5th. So by all means, please come and see the session. I'd love to hear from you. How many of you out there are going to be in New Orleans for TechEd? Raise your hands. I'm just kidding. I can't see you. So that's just a little webinar humor there. But if you are going to be there, by all means, look me up there on Wednesday at 1:30 at the conference. It's a huge place. If you've been there before, the New Orleans location for TechEd is just huge. I think it's worse than Orlando because it's one long box. So, but give it a shot. See if you can find me there at the session, and you'll see that it's a real follow-up to this one. In this one, we're going to talk about 101 unified messaging. So, with that being said, let's get started here. We'll talk a little bit about what is unified messaging. So unified messaging, this was released as a separate server role with Exchange 2007. And it's really a set of services. The services, they're enhanced with each service pack and major release to the point where now it's just really a phenomenal solution. In fact, some folks have kind of shied away from it because they're concerned that it may not live up to the hype. But I can tell you I've seen this deployed in companies that are enterprise scale companies with thousands of users, and it works like a charm. Basically what it does is it provides for a universal inbox of email. It has email, voicemail, and if configured, incoming faxes. But primarily the big part to it is the voicemail side. The fact that now Exchange has built in this universal inbox where voicemail is included. Whereas in times past, you typically had to purchase a separate solution. Or maybe the voicemail solution that you went with also offered the ability for it to now be posted into your email. So it's not like this is something new or revolutionary. Like I said, it's been out since Exchange 2007, and it's been a solution that companies have proposed, third-party solutions have offered for a long time. It's just at this point, you have the ability to get it right from within Exchange itself. Now, taking a look at it from 100,000 feet, unified messaging is built right into the mailbox server role to provide for a universal inbox of email, voicemail, and incoming fax. So if it's built right in, that may take some of you a little bit off guard because you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, you know, this is something that I want to have as a choice. And you're going to see that that's changed over time from what we had originally with 2007. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But you know, within your organization, you probably have a PBX that handles incoming calls, and you probably have some kind of voicemail piece that you set up as well. You usually have a team come in, a telephony team, to come in and handle these things. It's very rare that the IT admin or the Exchange admin also has to worry about the telephony side to things. Well, so here's the thing. With the unified messaging services, Microsoft isn't looking for you to throw away your phone system. Now, if you wanted to do that, you would have to go with a link solution. So unified messaging is part of the unified communications initiative that Microsoft is pushing, but it doesn't replace your telephony system. Rather, what they really want here is just to break one little piece of it, the voicemail piece. With unified messaging, if it's configured properly, you can have voicemails left for end users that can be MP3s or some other audio format, and you can even have them transcribed into the email. So that's pretty cool. It's not just that it takes the voicemail and gives it to the end user, but there are other things that the end user can benefit from as part of the unified messaging services. And we'll talk about some of the top features in a moment. So you can have the transcription, you have the email. You can also, if you want to configure this, you can have incoming fax configured if you have a partner fax server solution with a URI provided by the fax solution provider. So with 2007, this was provided for you, but it seemed like there were so many different issues with it that they decided to yank that with 2010 and now 2013, and you kind of have to go with a third-party solution and then snap it into snap the URI into the settings for unified messaging. So in continuing to discuss this from a higher perspective here, here's pretty much what has shifted. There's been a shift in unified messaging services from a separate role in Exchange 2010 to a set of services in the Exchange 2013 mailbox server role. Now, many of you are probably not working in a production environment with Exchange 2013 just yet, and that's okay. Up until just very recently, with the release of the cumulative update for Exchange 2013, I wouldn't have even recommended that you use this in a production environment. But now that it seems to be ready for production, deployment, folks may be thinking about shifting things over. Well, keep in mind, if you have 2010 in your environment, then you have the unified messaging server role that could be installed on its own server, or it could be combined with other typical server installations like the CAS role or the hub transport role or whatever. But now with Exchange 2013, it's not a choice. It's installed automatically. When you install a mailbox server role, unified messaging services are installed with it. Now, that has had people a little bit frustrated because they say, wait a minute, before I had a choice, but now I don't have a choice. These services are going to be on my server. Well, let me put you at ease. If you're not using the services, and many aren't, if you're not using the services, then they don't actually do anything. They're not going to have a performance hit against your server because they're not working. If you are using the services, great. And a lot of folks, as time is progressing, they're realizing the value of having unified messaging built right in. So again, it's really up to you, but it's not going to be a tremendous hit to your performance to have these services in place. There's also a service on the client access server. So with Exchange 2013, perhaps you're not aware that we've gone from 4 internal roles down to 2. And the client access server is still your front-end role there, but it's been changed to more of a proxy redirection role. There's no actual rendering on the CAS server at this point. All of that's done back on the mailbox server. So a little bit more pressure on the mailbox server, as you can see, with services being added to it, and then all the hub transport services. Most of them have been moved over to the mailbox server as well. So the CAS is this proxy, but it does have some services. It does have, for example, with hub transport services, it does have a front-end transport service to get things back to the mailbox server, and it has the ability to handle calls coming in. And it then transfers it back to the mailbox server for unified messaging. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an architectural update in terms of Exchange 2013 and unified messaging. Let's talk more on the end user side. What are the benefits to going with unified messaging? Because obviously, it's going to take a little work on your part to make this happen. So what are the benefits to doing it? Well, if we look here, these are what I consider the top 10 unified messaging features. And it's just my personal opinion as far as, the features themselves, as far as the different options that you have that end users can benefit from. So for starters, there's Outlook voice access, where you can access voicemail, you can listen to, you can forward or reply to email messages, you can listen to calendar information, you can access or dial contacts who are stored in the global address list or a group in their contacts, you can accept or cancel meeting requests, you can set a voicemail message to let callers know that the called party is away. So there's a lot of cool things with Outlook voice access. So that's one thing. Voicemail preview is another cool feature. This is where the voicemail, when you leave a voicemail, it gets transcribed. And this is good for 2 things. So first of all, it's great for things like, how when someone leaves you a voicemail and it's like 10 minutes long. It probably not that long, but it's really long. And then they leave their number at the end of it. They're like, oh, so how you doing? How's everything going? Hope you're doing good. Oh, you asked for my number. My number is 555-1212. And it's like, what? What did they say? And now you have to listen to this whole message again. That's annoying. Well, with voicemail preview, there's a couple of things that's cool about it. First of all, it attempts to transcribe the voicemail itself, so you can read the whole thing instead of having to listen to it. And then if there's a number in there, it transcribes the number. Now, granted, it's not perfect. So that's actually a benefit to it, is that it's very funny to watch and read some of the ways that the voicemail preview transcribes your message or someone's message to you. But the cool thing about the number is that if the number isn't right, if it doesn't transcribe the number right, you can click the number, and if you're playing it through Outlook or Outlook web app, it will jump right in the message to where the recording is for that number. So you don't have to listen to the whole thing. You don't have to fish for it. You just click the number and boom, it brings you right to that part of the voicemail where you can listen to it yourself. And if the transcription is incorrect, you can kind of hear it for yourself and make your own transcription. So that's a really cool feature. Incoming fax is we already mentioned, is good for having faxes come right in. With a third-party solution, you can also work with outgoing faxes, but not within Exchange. That's not really the point of the Exchange part here. There are call answering rules that end users can use. They can set up their own rules on how they want certain things to happen when someone calls, depending on who's calling and so forth. Play on phone. Obviously, if you don't have a headset, maybe you're working off of speakers, you don't want the message maybe to be played right there for everyone in your office to hear, so you could shoot it over to a phone and you can listen to it there. There are auto attendants, which is great. We'll talk about that in a moment. Language packs, which are awesome because, you know, obviously Exchange is not just in English. You have Exchange for companies all over the world: Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, you know, hundreds of languages. So having language packs, and they're always developing more language packs. So if your language isn't represented, just give it time. You can snap those in. The message waiting indicator, this was something that was missing from early releases of unified messaging, but you know, obviously when you've got a message waiting for you, you typically want your phone to demonstrate that. That may sound like more of a link thing, but it is connected back to unified messaging, because if someone leaves a voicemail, now the message waiting indicator on your phone will blink for you. Missed call voicemail notification text, that's built right into. And then protected voicemail, there's the ability to protect your voicemail. So to me, those are my top 10 features. Let's look at them, you know, a little more in depth here real quick. We already talked about the Outlook voice access, where users can call their inbox to access their voicemail, email, calendar, contacts, and so forth. And it's all read to the user with text-to-speech. So yeah, that's not necessarily always awesome. You know, when someone has written you an email and now you have to listen to it read to you by the computer voice. But those are getting much better as time has gone on. It's not like Microsoft Bob back in the early 90s there. You know, the text-to-speech is pretty advanced, and no doubt it will continue to advance as time goes by. And then, let's see, voicemail preview. We talked about the speech-to-text, which is pretty funny at times. It uses best guess for words it does not understand. Incoming fax, or as we mentioned, requires a special fax vendor that will allow faxes to be sent to your inbox in TIFF format. Play on phone, allowing them to play over their phone rather than computer speakers. And then this auto attendant, and this is the one we really didn't go in depth on yet. This allows for a set of default prompts, but can also have company-specific prompts. So the default prompts, you know, once you set up an auto attendant, it will just say, you know, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, or say 1 for this, say 2 for that. And that's where you can have it be voice or DTMF. The DTMF is where, let's say a person has a dilemma when it comes to their accent, or, you know, they're just not being understood by the auto attendant. You can switch it from voice prompted, you know, to being voice activated, or using their touch tone phones. So DTMF is like dial tone something or other. The acronym eludes me at this point, but you can set up your auto attendants to be both. So you're thinking, this is awesome, this is great, how have I never worked with this before, how have I never heard of this before? Well, look, the fact of the matter is that it's different, it's unique, and it involves telephony, and so a lot of admins have shied away from it, and that's okay. That's why we're doing a Unified Messaging 101 and prepping you for the, you know, the level 3 400 session that we're going to have at TechEd, because if you really don't, you know, if you really don't know the value of this, then you might be missing out on something that you're already paying for. It's already included right within Exchange. Now, the next question that comes into your mind, however, is, great, so how do I get this up and running? What do I need to do? Well, I'll be honest with you. My first recommendation for you is to contact your telephony team or the telephony expert for your environment. That's what's represented by the little picture down at the bottom there. The fact of the matter is that this is going to take some working with your PBX or IP-PBX, whatever you have in your environment. You may need to implement another piece of hardware, a voice over IP gateway, and we'll talk about the different integration options. But basically, you have two ways to integrate here. You typically have, from your public switch telephone network, lines coming in, trunk lines. And from there, you need to have that really managed as far as you're really not wanting to break the whole system down. You're really looking to just connect in the unified messaging piece. Now, granted, if you're using Link, that's a whole nother configuration option there as well. But a lot of folks haven't switched over to Link just yet. So all we're looking to do is that when someone calls into your organization and they don't get an answer from your phone and they want to leave a voicemail, instead of leaving a voicemail on the existing system, we want them to be redirected to your unified messaging solution, which, your Exchange solution basically. And then your CAS server will handle routing it back to the mailbox server for your mailbox and so forth. So depending on the size of your environment, this could be a very complex thing if you have multiple branch offices, multiple PBXs and so forth. But it's not rocket science, as they say. And you really need to have your telephony expert or team of experts involved. So let's talk about the different configurations here for a minute. So you've got your PSTN, you've got your trunk lines coming in, and we'll define those in a little bit. And then you have your PBX or IP-PBX, and you have the various extensions that go to the different phone systems from there. Now, PSTN stands for Public Switch Telephone Network, and the trunk lines that come into your organizations, they connect to a PBX or IP-PBX. So unlike your home, where you might have one line coming in, unless you're using some type of voice over IP solution. But back in the day, we used to have a line coming into our house, and if you wanted more lines, you could ask for them. But when it comes to large organizations, they kind of bundle them all together into trunk lines, and then those lines go into your PBXs, and then you don't typically have a one-to-one ratio. It's not like every single person. Let's say you've got 1,000 people in your organization. You don't necessarily have 1,000 lines, one for each person, so that everyone can be on the phone at the same time. You typically, take a reasonable ratio of how many people you expect to be on the phone, and then you make sure that you have enough lines for that. And you can max that out. I mean, that's the funny thing. If you don't have 1,000 lines and you only have, let's say, 500 connections that can be possibly made through the trunk lines, well, then you're looking at a situation where if 501 people try to call out or use the phone at the same time, somebody's going to have a problem. So it's just a matter of what do you want to pay for and how many people do you think are going to be on the phone at the same time, and you work that out with your organization that handles your lines coming in from the telephone network. So okay, now you might be thinking, I've never had to worry about that. Well, but it's something that does happen. I mean, you don't have telephone service in your organization without somebody worrying about that. Now you just kind of have to talk with those people that are worrying about it and let them know that you want to break something. You want to make it so that now your Exchange environment handles the voicemail piece. Times have changed. Maybe you remember pictures like this. Maybe you don't remember seeing this, hopefully, unless you're 100. But this is what we had in the old days. But today we have T1 trunking, T3 trunking. It allows for digital data streams of solid rates depending on whatever you purchase, and that's pretty cool. It's good to know that things have changed over the years, and so we have all this fancy stuff coming in. But in the end, it usually taps into a PBX or an IP-PBX. So how do we break the solution and make it work with our unified messaging? Well, okay, if you have a legacy PBX, and let's say it is on the approved line of PBXs that Microsoft has put out, then you can go with a voice over IP gateway, and what that really just does is it connects into the PBX and it switches things around so that that traffic that typically is going through your PBX, the voice side to it can also go, can be translated into IP traffic for your packet switch network internally, and it correspondingly can now communicate with the unified messaging server. So that's one way of doing this. You can, if you use a legacy PBX, you can get a voice over IP gateway and make it work. The other way you can make this work is if you have an IP PBX, then you don't need the voice over IP gateway. Now, if you're sitting here, and I see I've got a good number of folks online here. Many of you perhaps work with this kind of stuff in a lab environment. Maybe you're still students of Exchange. Maybe you're even in the Exchange world, but you don't necessarily think you're going to be able to play with this in a production environment. So what do? How do you work with this in a lab environment, let's say, and really get the sense of it? We're going to take a look at some of the settings and things. And the cool thing about Exchange is that you can configure all the settings you want. You can really make it like you've set it all up completely. But without an actual IP-PBX or voice over IP gateway or something of that sort, you really have no way of testing and really hearing the audio prompts, making sure everything's really working, like calling from one phone to another to see if it works. There's no way to do that. Well, here's the good news. It's going to cost a little bit of money, but there is a way for you to test this in a lab that is reasonably priced. Personally, I like using an AudioCodes MP114 voice over IP gateway. Here's an example of it. Now, you don't have to just buy a piece of hardware. You could, if you want, go with some kind of like virtual solution. You can download like things like Trixbox, and you can work with it that way. But if you did want to play around with some kind of hardware device, this is the favorite one that I've worked with. The Microsoft Exchange team recommended this to me a little while back. And what I like about it is you can see there's FXS ports. Stands for Foreign Exchange Station. That's where those get connected to a telephone. So FXS is an interface which drives a telephone, and the interfaces get phones plugged into them. They deliver battery power, they provide ringing and so forth. So you've got your FXS ports there. Then you got your FXO, which actually you can connect out to your PSTN if you have one or more lines. Most times if you're working with this in a lab, maybe at home or whatever, you only have the one line. But you can make this work. You can make it so that this can be a real working lab setup with two extensions, only two phone extensions. And then you see that there's an Ethernet port which connects into your router internally. So this is really a nice option because you have the chance to then work with this in your lab environment. So that's just something to consider. Now let's just go through the different. We already talked about the different ports here. Let's talk about unified messaging configuration, and then we'll take some questions. If there are any questions that you folks have, I would recommend that you submit some of them now. And then what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to an Exchange 2013 solution, and we're going to look at how you would set up unified messaging. There are a couple of things that you need to do to deploy unified messaging in your environment. Now, we've mainly been talking about the telephony components, things like your PBX line, organizing channels, deploying voice over IP gateways, and so forth. And in all of this, in the case of all of this, the strongest recommendation I can make, and you've heard me say it before already, is you want to utilize a telephony expert or a team of experts. That's the honest truth. You definitely want to make sure you have experts on that end of things, because as you're going to see, there are questions in the configuration side of unified messaging that you're just not going to know the answers to if you're not the telephony expert for your environment. So you have to just trust that you already have people there, and you'll be able to utilize their expertise as well. So configuring unified messaging elements. It's really not as complicated in this respect as you might think. So you're going to create a UM dial plan. And what a UM dial plan is it creates an object in Active Directory, and that object represents a set of extensions for either one PBX or IP-PBX or multiple PBXs or IP-PBXs. The key here is that the dial plan shares common extension numbers so that users can call from one person to another within a dial plan without having to append a number or dial the full number to access other lines. Okay? So users can have one dial plan associated with them, which is established by their policy. So what happens next is you need to create and configure your UMIP gateway. Now you could hold off on doing this and you could go forward with some of the other steps, but typically I create the dial plan, jump over, work on the UMIP gateway, then I create and configure the UM mailbox policy. Now the policy, there's a default policy that's created when you create your dial plan. So you don't have to necessarily create it, you could just configure the default. But obviously you might have multiple users under one dial plan, and so you might want to have different policies that apply to different users in terms of the different features that you want to enable. So we're going to take a look at that, and you'll see it's not all that complicated. It's really just a couple of checkboxes that you can turn on or off. All right. Create and configure the auto attendant or attendants. Now this is optional, but auto attendants are really awesome because you can actually make it look like you have an entire organization of people working for you, but you might just have a bunch of auto attendants set up. One to go to sales, one to go to marketing, one to go to research, and you can just create this whole world. Of course, that's in a lab environment. In a production environment, the cool thing about auto attendants is you typically have all of those departments and people working for you, and you need to make sure that they're accessible through the different auto attendants that you create. And then, of course, on the back end, you need to enable users. You want to associate a policy to those users and configure their PIN settings. So we're not going to handle the end user side. We're going to stay focused on the server side to the, on the configuration side to But once you have it all configured, you're going to want to enable the users in that respect and then make sure that they have their policies applied to them. All right. So let's jump over, let's answer a few questions first, and then we'll jump over and we will take a look at this from the Exchange side. Here we go. Let's just pull up our Exchange server, and let's see what questions have come in here. So the first one is, does Unified Communications work with Office 365? There is a piece to Office 365 that includes parts of this. For example, with Office 365, you have Link, and Link is included in there for your voicemail and you can do video conferencing and so forth. I don't know to what degree everything is included with Office 365, but I know that some of the pieces are definitely included. In order to do this in a lab environment, this is question 2. In order to do this in a lab environment, do I have to buy that equipment that you show on the graphic? No, you don't. In fact, you can see here, in this case, we're going to be configuring the dial plans and IP gateways and so forth, but I don't have that device connected up to this server or to this network. So you can do all the configuration as if you have a working box on the back end. The only thing is that without an actual piece of equipment, you can't do the testing of calling from one phone to another and having the phone pick up and making sure that everything's really working properly. So you do need some kind of equipment in order for it to really work. But to actually do lab work with it and kind of play around with the settings, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. Okay, so question 3, is there a special requirement to be aware in Active Directory before you implement unified messaging? No special requirements. Remember, when you install Exchange, it taps into Active Directory already. And so when you do things in Exchange, when you configure things, one of the cool things about Exchange is that it is so connected to Active Directory that even if your server goes down, you can bring it back because a lot of the settings are saved in Active Directory. Now, when it comes to the server and the services, on the mailbox server, the one thing that you do want to make sure you have a backup of is your, if you have any special voice prompts and things. So let's say you have an auto attendant, and instead of using the default audio for it, you decide, hey, you know what, I want to get the president of the company to record a little introduction message, like welcome to the company directory or whatever, and you can actually get that type of WAV file and pop it in. But you want to make sure you have a backup of that because it might not necessarily, get backed up otherwise. And then if you lose your server, you can bring it back from Active Directory, but you'll lose your WAV file. You'll have to go back to the president and get a new copy of it. All right, one more question here, and that is, I have Link 2010 and Exchange 2010 in a production environment, wondering which is best to upgrade first to 2013, Exchange or Link. Good question. So being that I don't know what your motivation is for going to Exchange 2013. I mean, is it just to get the latest and greatest out there? There are only a handful of actual features that have changed in 2013 that might make you want to make that jump, right? So I would say, if you are upgrading, I would go with Link first. However, I don't know if you have SharePoint either in that mix. However, obviously all of these things play together. So if you're going to upgrade one, you might as well upgrade the other as well and see what features now benefit from having both upgraded. But unless you have a real reason to do the upgrade, if everything's working well in your environment, you'd have to tell me why you're moving to Exchange 2013. because at this point, and maybe you've seen some of my other webinars or watched my my course on Exchange 2013 administration, but other than a handful of changes, whether it's modern public folders, a change to the architectural structure, the ability to have data loss prevention rules, things of that sort, it's not overwhelmingly compelling to make the move for most folks. So you're welcome, whoever asked that question, you're welcome to email me offline, peter@trainsignal.com. So it's peter@trainsignal.com. And by all means, email me and let's talk about it. Let's see if we can work through what your motivation is and see where we're going. I could see that you're on SharePoint 2013 already, which is really cool because that is one reason why you might want to move to Exchange 2013, because the ability to have site mailboxes, which again, I'm not sold on that either. So I hate to be cynical, but let's talk about that offline and let's see if we can come up with a good solution. We can also pull in our link expert, Stephen McCasey, and he'll be able to answer more questions about Link 2013 as far as what the compelling factors are there to go to 2013. All right, so we'll hold off on questions at this point until the end of the session. Let's jump over to the server and let's just talk about how easy or difficult it is to work with unified messaging itself. So as you can see here, we have this is the Exchange Admin Center. Now if you haven't worked with Exchange 2013 before, they've changed everything. So this is what it looks like now as far as the GUI. There is no MMC console. Everything is built off of the EAC, which I'm sorry, I can't say EAC without saying, dude, you're riding it. So for those of you folks that have kids, you've probably seen Finding Nemo like 1,000 times. And so Exchange Admin Center, EAC, it just kind of brings back all those memories there. But what they've done here is actually something pretty cool. They've made it so that things are more organized by features. We have recipients here, we have permissions, you've got tabs up at the top, and here you see your Outlook web app policies and so forth, compliance management. So things are really organized a lot better, I think, than the way it was with the MMC Exchange Management Console. And I'm starting to really like this interface. Now you might be thinking, wow, there's a lot of bright space there and the icons are kind of metro looking. Yeah, that's the only thing I don't like about this. The whole metro interface, really hate that. I'll tell you this though, they ran with it. They didn't just decide, hey, we're going to change a couple of things, but they really, I mean, they went with it. Windows 8 and Server 2012 and the whole thing, they decided to just really kind of drown us in it. So I'm not really too thrilled with the look. And it is a lot of white space. I am wearing sunglasses even now just to be able to work with the EAC. But here you see we have unified messaging. It's built right in, snapped right in. And as I said, when you do the install, you don't choose it. If you choose a mailbox server, boom, you're going to have it all installed with it. So there's no choice. Now you can see here, I've already created a dial plan. And the way you create a dial plan, you hit the little plus sign over here on the left. You open it up. You got to give it a name. So here we can just say TS Webinar Dial Plan 2. You have to know the number of extensions. So if you call the person next to you, are they extension 2001, 2002? How many extension digits do they have? Is it 4? Is it 5? How many do you use? So a lot of organizations use 4. Then you choose the dial plan type. And here the dial plan type defines the syntax, format, and protocols for calls. So really this is interesting. Oh, I jumped back over to the slides. Hold on a second. So this is interesting because, when you look at this, you see you have telephone extension, E164, and SIP URI. And so really the type depends. The most common type of dial plan, it really depends as far as what type you choose here on the gateways you're using, the PBX that you're using. Are you using SIP at all? This is the stuff that you have to find out from your telephony guys. So that's one option. The next is your voice over IP security mode. You can choose SIP secured, unsecured, or secured. Your audio language, and if you don't have other language packs installed, then you're only going to see the language pack for the audio that you've installed when you installed Exchange. So here notice it says if you have mailbox servers on premises, before you create the dial plan, you must install the UM language pack for the language you plan to use on each mailbox server. So just something to think about for your voicemail preview and so forth. You have to put in your country region code. Once you're done with that, you click Save, and it jumps forward and it creates it. Now you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, do I have equipment? Do I have a server that's handling these things? Do I have a PBX? Do I have an IP PBX? What am I using on the back end? Well, look, in this case, we don't have anything connected up to this. This is just a server. There is no voice over IP gateway. There is no PBX. This is a lab environment with nothing attached. So it's just like I said, one of the questions was, do you need that expensive piece of equipment? It's probably a few $100s for that little mini, 2-channel IP gateway. You don't. You can actually configure all of this and get comfortable with configuring the settings. The only thing is you're not able to see it work. Now with 2007, there was like a test phone, and that was pretty cool because you could actually test and see that all of this works. I don't think that test phone works anymore, but you can look around and see if you can find a way to do this without getting the expensive equipment. Like I said, you can use a virtual system like a Trixbox, and even with that, you can install cards for your telephony. So there's other cool, funky ways that you can make this, work in a lab environment. But for now, we're just kind of testing to see how would you create all these different plans. So, all right, I've got the dial plan. Now, you see there's a couple of ellipses here. I can click that. Notice I can get call statistics, user call logs, so that's another cool thing that you can get right from within the dial plan section. Now, you might be thinking, well, where are the mailbox policies? Where are the auto attendants? And if you worked with Exchange 2010, there were 4 different tabs, and the policies and attendants were included up there. But it's changed now. We'll come back to this in a second. Let's just jump over to IP gateways, and let's create a gateway. Notice with IP gateways, this is pretty simple. So let's say we have our, MP, voice over IP gateway 114, right? And it has to have an address. You can put in the FQDN or put in an address. And so let's just give it a bogus one. All right, and then we, FQDN or IP address, and then you have to associate your gateway with a dial plan. So in our case, we have 2 dial plans. So we're going to go with the dial plan 1 here that already was in existence, and we say OK, and then save. You'll notice there's not much more we can do here. I mean, this is it. We can open it up. There's a couple of settings like here. There's 2 settings that didn't exist in the wizard, which is kind of funny. I mean, they could have just put these settings right in the wizard. But allow outgoing calls through this UMIP gateway. You can deselect that if you want to stop it. Or allow message waiting indicator. So that's part of the gateway itself as well. Then we can turn that off if we want. Okay, so that's it. We've got our gateway. We go back over to dial plans. Let's open up this first dial plan and see what kind of changes we can make to it. All right, so you say, wow, creating a dial plan was easy, dial plan type, number of digits, whew, that's done, great. Not quite. The dial plan, to create it with the wizard, it's one of the weird things about Exchange, and I kind of like it, I guess, but creating stuff is just like the first part of a lot of the things that you do. After that, you have to go back and configure it. So yes, we did create the dial plan, nice and easy, but to configure it, if we click configure, there it is. There's where we see all the real settings here. We've got dial codes, and you can see all the different information. Who do we talk to about this? That's right, the telephony people. You have Outlook voice access settings, and here you can change the default greeting or the informational announcement. Remember I said that you can have the president of the company or somebody, maybe the president of, or the manager of each department, depending on how you're setting up the auto attendants and so forth. You can get different greetings. In this case, this is Outlook Voice Access. So this is when people are calling into Outlook Voice Access. These are typically your own people calling in. You can have a greeting for them. You can have informational announcements based upon the different times of the year, whether it's a holiday announcement and so forth. Here are your settings. And here a lot of folks ask me, hey, where do I change that audio codec? You mentioned MP3s. What if I want something different? Well, personally, I like leaving the MP3, but you can change it to GC11, WMA, or GSM. You'll get different compressions and different sizes. I think MP3 is one of the smaller ones, if not the smallest out of the 4 choices there. Number of sign-in failures before disconnecting. You can change that. You can change the timeouts and retries here, right? Audio language. So all of this is there. Dialing rules. You can specify dialing rules to control the types of calls that users can make. And this is interesting because, a lot of times with this, you're really thinking of it in terms of voicemail coming in and then being able to get their voicemail. but this is also tapping into their ability to connect with others in their dial plan, as well as being able to forward calls and so forth. So you can make dialing rules here. This is especially cool when you're working with Link and the two work together. You have dialing authorization. So here you can say allow calls in the same dial plan, allow calls to any extension. That's not on by default. And then transfer and search. So do you want to allow callers to be able to transfer to users, leave voice messages without ringing a user's phone? Do you want that? Allow callers to search for users by name or alias and so forth. So this is the dial plan. You can create all of these different settings right here on the dial plan, right? But that's a little different from the policy. And notice the difference. When you create a dial plan, the policy is automatically created. So I didn't create this policy. Now I could create additional policies if I want to, and then you can apply different policies to different individuals. But we're going to stick with this default one just to take a look at the settings. Remember, this is Unified Messaging 101, so we're not going to get deep on anything specific here. Just want you to get a chance to really see the whole thing. And I think that if you see it, you'll be less afraid of it. It won't be as daunting and as intimidating. Once you see the full length, breadth, height, and depth of this thing, it's not going to be so intimidating to you because you'll see where the edges are to the information. I say that, and yet at the same time, a buddy of mine, Paul Robichaud, who's also an MVP, he just sent me his Exchange 2013 Unified Messaging chapter just to see if I can find points for the TechEd deep dive, the Deep Dark Secrets seminar that I'm going to be doing there at TechEd. And I was like, all right, great, thanks. Maybe I'll find something nitty-gritty that I don't really talk about, and he's found this really cool point. And it's like a 100-page chapter. And I was like, yikes, this could be a whole book in and of itself. And that's true. In fact, for Train Signal, actually for Exchange 2010, we have a unified messaging course that covers unified messaging from A to Z. So it's a big discussion if you really want to get into it. I mean, if you really want to get into the setup of it and how you configure it and whether or not you have one server and have all calls going through it, or if you have branch offices and you want one in each location. I mean, it can get pretty involved. But we just want to show you where the edges are here with the 101 series. So here's your message policy, and look how easy this is. It's like allow voicemail preview, check on, check off. I mean, you can just turn this off, and then whoever you apply this policy to, they're not going to get voicemail preview. And down the line, message waiting indicator, Outlook voice access, missed call notifications, play on phone, turn it on, turn it off, totally up to you. Allow inbound faxes. Remember I said we have to get the partner URI? Well, if you have a third-party fax solution, you can put it in there. Pretty cool stuff. Do you want to allow Microsoft to improve voicemail previews? So you can allow analysis of voicemail messages left by callers. Yeah, that's totally up to you. Message text. So whenever you enable unified messaging, the end user gets an email, and there's a default email. It says, hey, you've been invited to be part of unified messaging, and it will give them information about their PIN and their access information. But you can create your own text here for that, for PIN reset, for when a user receives a voice message, for when a user receives a fax message. So you could put in your own customized text if you like. PIN policies. Obviously, the end user needs to include a PIN in order to use Outlook voice access. So how many digits? The default is 6. You can make it, 4 or 5, whatever you'd like. PIN recycle count. Allow common PIN patterns, yes or no, in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that kind of thing. Enforce PIN lifetime. How many days? In that case, you could specify the number of days that Outlook voice access pins are valid before they have to be changed. Number of sign-in failures before PIN reset, and the number of sign-in failures before lockout. So that's pretty high, actually. 15, if they've tried 15 times, they probably are just trying to hack into the account. So you might want to lower that. Dialing authorization, select the types of calls to authorize, and again, this is similar to what we saw with the dial plan itself, and then protected voicemail. So here you can protect voice messages from unauthenticated callers and protect it from authenticated callers, and so there's a lot of other options here. So this is your dial plan, your policy, your unified messaging policy, and it connects in with a dial plan, but you then apply it to your end users. So, and you can only apply one policy per user. And that leads us to the last part here, which is the AutoAttendants. We're not going to talk about hunt groups. That's all connected back to your voice over IP gateway. So that's more telephony oriented than we want to get into here. But if we just look over at AutoAttendants, we can create a new AutoAttendant, and we can give it a name. So just AA1, and we can create it as enabled. We can set the AutoAttendant to respond to voice commands, and then we can provide an access number, whatever it is, depending on your extension. Like if your extension is 2001 is the first extension, we could do 2000, add that in. Now there's an extension for it. We click Save, okay, and you say, great, whew, I'm done. Nope, again, again, don't get too excited. When you open it up now, notice all the options that you have here. You can, greetings, business hours, menu navigation. So you could change the auto attendant prompts depending on the business hours, or whether or not there's a holiday schedule. You can configure a holiday schedule, and every country is different, so it's not necessarily the same schedule. Otherwise, this could just be propagated automatically for you. But you could set up your own holidays and so forth. Menu navigation, address book and operator access, and dialing authorization. Now, remember we talked about DTMF? Let's just jump back here. Let's say we wanted to create, an auto attendant that is our DTMF auto attendant, and we can enable it, but we're not going to set it to respond to voice commands. So this will only be, accessible. Here, we'll give it an extension, 2001. So let's say this one is free. Someone could call directly into this auto attendant this way instead of going through the voice one first. So now we have this, but it doesn't respond to voice commands. It will use numbers, right? And we'll, obviously it depends on what the auto attendant leads off to. So you can create additional pieces to this and additional prompts. But if we go back to the first one, this is just pretty cool that we could say, hey, use this auto attendant when voice commands don't work. Now, before we had the DTMF, we didn't have anything to tell it to use, but now we can say, yeah, use the DTMF. If voice commands don't work, then jump off to this one, and that's pretty cool. The other thing you need to do then is you need to make sure you have, menu navigation, and here's where you put in, for sales, press 1, for accounting, press 2, or say 1 or press 2, that kind of thing. So you could put all of that here in the menu navigation. So some really fun things you can do here with the different auto attendants, with the messaging policies and so forth. It's now that you can kind of see that this is really all that's involved on the configuration side, then you realize that once you get the telephony side done, and once that's already worked out, and once you have this up and running, really it's a set it and forget it type of thing. I mean, you don't necessarily have to worry about this continually. In fact, in the company that we just recently deployed, it was 2,000 end users, and we set it, forgot about it, everybody loves it, no problems whatsoever. That's the kind of implementation you want. So I'm a huge fan of this. I just don't think it's being used enough, and I really think that it's something that could be, utilized more if people weren't afraid of it. So that's Unified Messaging 101. Hopefully that's kind of taken the edge off of it a bit. Let's do this. Let's jump back over to our slides here, and we will just mention the ways to keep in touch with TrainSignal. As far as getting in touch with me, again, my email is peter@trainsignal.com. But here you can see. Here you can see you could go to Facebook, you could go to Twitter, you could go to YouTube. There's a lot of videos on YouTube, LinkedIn. Let's jump back over to the questions, and let's see if we can kind of round this out with a few questions that have come in. Let's see here. Question that came in is, if you have two different forests running, what is the best implementation for this type of environment? Okay, that's a good question. A lot of this, what's really funny about unified messaging is it's a service. It's a service. So the services themselves are not really the complex part. Obviously, in your environment, if you have multiple forests, the real question is, what does your telephony environment look like? How are you running in terms of Exchange? Do you have one Exchange server handling both forests? Which is fine, you can make that work, but do they all use the same PBX? Like, how do you have your telephony set up is the big question, because then depending on that, you'll have to have different dial plans, different IP gateways, and then in that respect, once you apply the policies to your end users, those policies come with direction on which dial plan to use, and that dial plan comes with which gateway to use. So it's really not super complicated in that respect. The bigger thing is kind of designing it out based upon what your telephony environment looks like. All right, and then you can set up your dial plans and your auto attendants and so forth that way. Another question here, I have Exchange 2007 in my environment, and I want to upgrade to Exchange 2013. Do you have any update on 2013 SP1 to support the coexistence? Oh, okay. Yes, so it's not Service Pack 1. You know, Microsoft has switched over to a new method of updating the Exchange environment. Not to say that there won't be Service Packs, but just that Service Pack 1 is not even in beta at this point. You know, they just released what they call Cumulative Update 1. So in order to integrate with Exchange 2007 to provide for coexistence and then to migrate over, what you're going to need to do first of all is make sure you have the latest roll-up for 2007 installed, right? And then you're going to need to have Cumulative Update 1 for Exchange 2013, right? You need those two pieces. And then you'll be able to transition over and then drop your 2007. Now, for very specific help on how you can do this, I want you to look up the Deployment Assistant, right? It's an Exchange tool. It's online. And the cool thing about the Deployment Assistant is you pop in what you've got. So if you're doing a transition from 2007 to 2013, you tell the Deployment Assistant that. It will ask you 4 or 5 like multiple choice questions, like do you use unified messaging, yes or no, things about maybe public folders and so forth. Just a couple of radio button selections. You click next, and it will give you literally the step-by-step you need to do the whole transition. So it's a beautiful tool that the Exchange team released. They had it with 2010, and now they've updated it for 2013, and it will walk you through the whole thing. So yes, you can, at this point, you can do a transition from 2007 to 2013. You just need to make sure you have all the little you know, update bits installed and so forth, and you'll be good to go. All right, so if there are no other questions at this time, let me just say, I hope that you enjoyed this session. It was maybe a little more than 101, you know, maybe we went a little deeper in certain things, but I think it's essential for you to realize and appreciate that if you are using Exchange, whether it's 2007, 2010, or 2013, this is built right in. And it works well. I'm really super proud of it. One little note as far as virtualization of it, you can virtualize the unified messaging role. In 2010, it's got to be SP1 or higher. But with 2013, you can automatically virtualize it as well. So it's a great solution. You just need to, you know, give it a shot. Maybe deploy it in a lab environment, see how it goes, and I have no doubt that once you get it working, you're going to be hooked, and your end users will love it.